Welcome to Developer Stories on the Road to MSIX, a podcast for developers that are interested in updating their installers to MSIX. I'm Tim Mangan. A warning that this episode will be a bit longer than the others. I know that you're used to nice, short, slick pieces that Microsoft likes to show you. Click, click, and voila. But I want to not only provide the introduction here, but also some of the experiences that we've had with MSIX packages that you might run into. Before we talk about how, let's understand what will be done, generally by the tools that you use and possibly behind the scenes. Ultimately, you'll have a folder that contains ingredients to be built into the package, probably by a utility named MakeAppX. The folder will contain the AppX manifest file, which contains the metadata that defines your MSIX package. In some cases, you will be providing a template file for the AppX manifest file, named something like package.appxmanifest. That's the tooling is going to use to generate the final AppX manifest file during the build. Your package may or may not have some .dat files that make up the virtual registry settings of your package. Of this series to understand what that's about. There will also be a resources.pri file, which is generated using the makeResources command during your build. And there will be the output files of your other code projects, either directly in this folder in subfolders or under a VFS folder if you want to mimic the locations that your original MSI installer would have put the files. In Chapter 3 of this series, we discussed the VFS. You have your code, possibly generated by a single project or maybe a set of projects. Many of you are likely using Visual Studio or VS Code for the IDE, or at least your application started out from there. I'll talk assuming a solutions file is used, but of course that is not really necessary. You have a number of options on how to create your MSIX package, so let's start talking through these options. These are the most basic options available to you. If your application is UAP, WinUI, or .NET Desktop project, you would likely look at adding an additional MSIX packaging project to your solution. If your application is Win32 or .NET Framework based, then the Windows Application Project, or WAP for short, is what you're looking for. If you're starting from scratch with a new .NET based application, there's also an option to create everything in one shot, the app and the package. To do this, you use the single project MSIX package template. Those of you who are more DevOps oriented might look at the Windows App SDK or Windows App CLI for tooling to create your package. And there's always the tooling that we've been using for IT shops to directly convert your existing installer by recapturing the installation changes that it makes. You probably should not use this to create your production package, but it may be instructional for you to see how it generates the AppX manifest file. And there are, of course, a bevy of Microsoft partners that you might already be working with that have options for you as well. Now, I'm not familiar with all of them, so if you use tooling from someone not on that list, just ask them if they support MSIX also. Before you start, however, if you have a Win32 or .NET Framework code, you have a couple of choices to your modernization journey. You can modernize your code in the installer, or just the installer. Either choice is okay, and your organization will need to choose what's best for your situation. If you want to modernize your code, Microsoft makes this pretty easy with a wizard built right into Visual Studio. Just open up your existing solution, pick a project, and select Modernize. I would recommend asking the tool to create your new modernization package as a copy so that you can easily see the old code. But if not, just have a handy backup of the old code for you to view. You would pick the runtime version you want, but I generally would recommend picking the latest LTS version of .NET. Now, the wizard is fantastic, and the conversion runs really fast, but it's going to leave you with a list of to-do things that you'll need to address manually. Basically, you'll work through that list, build, fix, build again, fix, and build again. And when you're done with all that, you'll try testing the project out and probably have to go back and make some more fixes. But this is something that I've used myself to modernize some apps, and it has gone extremely well. Some of the changes the wizard made to update the namespaces were a bit confused in my case, and if there's more than one original namespace with the same name, that seems to be the source of the problem. This would be something like system.windows.mediaimaging versus system.drawing.imaging. So I had to spend some time cleaning those things up, but it was pretty straightforward. This is a great example of why you need to have the old code handy. Microsoft keeps improving the modernization wizard, so perhaps it's better now. But all in all, I found it to be the fastest port I've ever done. Keep in mind that this modernization updates your code to build as .NET, but it's not really changing our older Windows APIs into the new modern ones, nor does it change your intent and old programming patterns. If your old code contains activities that aren't directly supported by the MSIX runtime, you may still need to add the package support framework to the package to remediate. A key change you might consider making to further modernize your code has to do with how your application deals with app configuration. Moving from registry-based configuration or private file-based configuration to the new systems.configuration API is considered to be the modern best practice. So read up on that and consider modernizing the app configuration in addition to changing out the runtime. So I can't walk you through all of the options on getting the package itself built, but it makes sense to cover the one that can always be used, and of course it must be used for older projects. This is the WAP. You just add the WAP template as a new project in your solution. Your other projects should be listed as dependencies, and this will affect the order of building, but also it brings the output from those projects into the WAP as ingredients. The WAP provides a package.appx manifest file, which is a template from which it will build the appx manifest. Ultimately, many of the things your original installer did to integrate the app into the system and the user experience, for example by placing files in certain locations or writing values into the Windows registry, especially under the classes key, should now be expressed in the appx manifest file. We will get into the appx manifest in a future chapter, or maybe 2 or 3. But to get started, this template should cover the basics for shortcuts, file associations, and shell command verbs to help you get going. I will warn you about something, however. In this template, you can put anything that you want to end up in the appx manifest file. However, due to the feature wanting to auto-increment the package version, the utility, when it rewrites that file, may lose some of the elements associated with newer appx manifest schema extensions that it didn't know about. So if you are going to add to that file, make sure you keep a backup copy and consider just marking the file read-only after you've changed it to prevent the build from losing those changes. The WAP does all the hard work for you. And if you choose to have the output package signed by the WAP, it'll do that too. I'm going to quickly remind you on some of what was discussed in the last chapter because it's important that you understand the concept of the VFS. You have two choices on where the files are placed in the package. The WAP is going to assume a flat structure. But if you want or need to use VFS pathing, you can do this by editing the WAP project XML file to control placement of the files within your package. So if your old installer wrote a vendor folder under the program files, the WAP will assume the files go directly into the root folder of your package or subfolders as appropriate. In that case, if you need VFS pathing, you would modify the paths using the relative paths shown on the right. As a reminder, when using the VFS, while you can specify all sorts of variabilized folders to the equivalent of base name folders, the MSIX runtime normally will only map requests for standard locations to your VFS paths, and these are the ones that are shown on the left. adding the PSF with MFR fixup is needed for all of the others. Oh, and as a reminder, you also need the MFR fixup if your app attempts to modify any of the non-binary files in your package folder, like your old private configuration files, for example. So go back and review Chapter 3 on this series on files or additional details if you need more information. Now let's also talk about some of the common issues we see when moving into MSIX packaging. Here's a quick list of the most common issues that you might experience. We'll go over each in a little more detail. Launching the application correctly from the shortcut falls into 4 different causes. First, a change to the working directory of your application executable that was a target of the shortcut LNK file that you traditionally used for the user to start that application. Under MSIX, the default is to set the working directory to the appropriate system folder, the System32 or the syswow64 folder based on the bitness of the application, not the folder that your exe is in or any other folder that you traditionally may have set in that LNK file. MSIX does not use your old LNK file to integrate the entry point into the Start menu. There's now a more recent AppX manifest extension called UAP11 Current Directory Path that you can add to the AppX manifest application element. And this will set the working directory correctly. But note that this extension is silently ignored on Windows Server 22, as the extension requires an OS with at least build 10.0.20000. Server 2022 is still supported by Microsoft and is heavily used in the large enterprise customer base. If this is an issue for your app, you'll need to cover all supported OSs. And the solution here is probably to use the PSF launcher, which can set the working directory to your app as you wish. If you do add PSF launcher, adding an execution alias entry to your AppX manifest application is also recommended. Now, if your application used command line arguments, these are handled through this extension. In this case, you do need to supply an LNK file in your package. The good news is that this extension is available on all currently supported OS versions. Oh, and by the way, Desktop 7 shortcut is also the only way to specify to place a shortcut on the user's desktop as part of the package installation. But please don't do that. Your commercial customers hate it. And your end user can always add the shortcut to the desktop if they want anyway. Your app today might want something to start up when the user logs in. The 2 most common techniques were to add a run key in the Windows registry or to place an LNK file in the startup folder. Here are the equivalent AppX manifest extensions to do just that. If this is for checking for application updates, you can't update the app that way anymore anyway inside of MSIX. So you really should take that out and utilize the native MSIX update capabilities. If this was being done for performance reasons, you seriously should consider if you need this. The typical user has 10 to 20 applications, and these things just slow down the login time for things that they might not be using today. So think about that. Your app might also not find its DLLs, especially if your installer modified the path variable or used app path registrations. These are not available or ignored under MSIX, so you're going to have to adjust. The typical solutions are shown here. But perhaps your app has issues finding other files. In that case, you likely need to use the PFS pathing and maybe the VFS MFR fixup in the package. And although I didn't add this into the list, if you had environment variables, you'll need to add the PSF envar fixup to make those available to your application. Finally, if your application installer added to the registry classes key, you may have issues related to a different hierarchy order of the AppX manifest and its insane rules regarding completeness and uniqueness. If you have these problems, we can normally overcome these issues, but it really is a subject that's too deep of a topic for today. So let's close out this chapter with a few references that you can see here. Next time, I hope to be talking more about the file type association issues of the classes key, and after that, we can get into COM. This concludes this chapter of The Road to MSIX. If you missed earlier chapters, you can get them from the Tmergent LinkedIn page or our YouTube channel. Keep an eye out for new chapters too. You can see some of the ones that we're planning here. But I'd also love to do a podcast with you about your experiences in creating MSIX packages. Just contact me on LinkedIn. I'm Tim Mangan on The Road to MSIX. Thanks for listening.